Today I'll be doing a brake fluid change on my 2005 Honda Pilot. For this I'm using 2 liters of .4 brake fluid, a small blue funnel, some liquid wrench because every bolt is going to be rusted, a 10mm wrench, I only ended up using the large one, some vinyl nitrile gloves, a brake fluid bleeding kit, a syringe, some paper towel, and a drip pan. The brake fluid should be changed every 24 months, 30,000 miles, or 48,000 kilometers. Now, first thing I'm going to do is remove the negative terminal on the battery. The brake fluid reservoir is located on the driver's side, right back against the firewall. And one word of caution when working with the brake fluid, you do not want to get any brake fluid on painted surfaces on your vehicle as it will damage them. There's also a small filter inside. We're going to have to remove that so that we can use the syringe to draw out all the old brake fluid from the reservoir. Now this step is optional. You can go straight to bleeding the brake fluid at the brake calipers. However, I do highly recommend using the sort of syringe and small plastic tube combination to suck all of the old brake fluid out of the brake fluid reservoir, simply because it just takes a lot longer to drain off this old fluid, and it will ultimately save you 15 or 20 minutes of brake bleeding in the long run. Now that the old brake fluid is out of the reservoir, I'm going to use the new .4 brake fluid and just fill it back up so I could start the draining process. Now here's where the small blue funnel comes into play. Normally on other vehicles I didn't use the funnel because the brake fluid reservoir is in a pretty easy spot to get to. However, on this 2005 Honda Pilot, because it's down low and there's a bunch of plastic stuff around it, it is difficult to get the bottle in there. So to avoid spilling it all over the place, doing a free pour, I do recommend the funnel. I'm starting with the rear passenger side brake, and the first thing I'm going to do is put the 10mm wrench onto the brake bleeding screw and install the brake bleeding kit. Once the bleeding kit is firmly secure, I'm going to use the 10mm wrench to turn the bleeder screw. I'm going to turn it approximately a half a turn until brake fluid starts to come out and fill the line with brake fluid. Now that's complete. I'm just going to use the small magnet on the bottle to attach the bottle to a point just above the brake caliper so that air bubbles can enter the bottle but not come back out. And now I'm going to move forward to the front of the vehicle and pump the brake approximately 6 to 7 times, just nice and slowly and smooth, and I find that will fill this small bottle up completely, and it'll be time to go to the rear of the vehicle and empty the bottle. Now these bottles are rather small. I would like to get a kit with a bigger bottle so that I didn't have to drain it so many times. So that is one negative point about this brake bleeding kit. For this first brake, I filled the small bottle approximately 7 times before I started seeing new brake fluid come out. It's critical not to let the reservoir run empty on brake fluid, so periodically check it and ensure that you continually have some brake fluid in it. It doesn't need to be full, but you do not want it to run dry, as that will introduce air bubbles into your brake system, and that's exactly what you don't want. So keep a small amount of fluid in there. Now that the new brake fluid is coming out at the caliper, I'm just going to turn the brake bleeding screw to the right to close it off, and then I'm going to remove the brake bleeding kit and drain it into my drip pan. When I've done the brake fluid on my other vehicles, I didn't have to take off the tires, but for this I found it was highly beneficial. Prior to installing the rubber cap on the brake bleeding screw, I'm just going to ensure that it's snug, and there's the small rubber cap. I'm just going to replace that. Once that's done, I'm going to throw the tire on and get ready to do the front driver's side brake. So at the front driver's side brake, the process is the same. Install the wrench, install the brake bleeding kit at a position above the brake caliper. Open the brake bleeding screw until fluid begins to enter the bleeding kit. You're then going to pump the brake 6 or 7 times to fill the brake bleeding kit bottle. I found it was only necessary to fill the small bottle approximately 5 times before I started seeing the new brake fluid coming out. So once you've done the first brake, all following brakes should be a little bit quicker to complete. Now I'm going to only show this process one time on each brake, but you're going to have to trust me. I did drain this small bottle 5 times. And again, always check your brake fluid reservoir at the front of the vehicle to ensure it doesn't go dry. Now to disconnect the system, I'm going to use the wrench to close the brake bleeding screw. I'll then disconnect the brake bleeding kit from the bleeding screw and drain the brake bleeding kit into my drip pan. The third brake I'm going to be doing is the rear driver side brake. Same drills again. Install the wrench onto the bleeding screw, install the brake bleeding kit onto the bleeding screw, use the wrench to open the bleeding screw and allow brake fluid to enter the kit, and then pump the brake 6 or 7 times to fill the small reservoir bottle on the bleeding kit. Again, for this brake, it took approximately 5 bottles of the small brake bleeding kit to have new fluid coming out. We're then going to close off the bleeder screw and remove the brake bleeding kit from the brake caliper assembly and drain that into the drip pan. The last step is to install the rubber cap onto the brake bleeder screw. And the final brake I'm going to do is the front passenger side. Install the wrench, install the brake bleeder kit, and use the magnet to put the bottle above the brake caliper. Open the bleeding screw, and then go and pump the brake 5 or 6 times to fill the reservoir bottle with brake fluid. Again, it took 5 bottles before I started seeing new brake fluid entering the brake bleeding kit. Now that I'm done, I'm going to close off the bleeder screw, remove the bleeder kit, empty it into the drip pan, and install the rubber cap onto the brake bleeding screw. An absolutely critical last step. You're going to want to fill the brake fluid reservoir to the fill line prior to putting on the cap on the brake fluid reservoir. And since I removed the negative terminal on the battery before I start the car up, I am also going to want to reinstall that so that my car will actually start. Now overall, this job took approximately an hour and a half to complete. So it is a little more time consuming than a simple oil change. However, overall I don't think it was appreciably more difficult than doing an oil change. As far as cost goes, I paid $35.89 after taxes for the 2 liters of .4, and the dealership price on this is $139.99, which after tax comes out to about $150. So just over $100 in savings by doing this job yourself. As always, I take the old brake fluid to a recycling depot once I have enough to justify the trip. Anyway, thanks for checking out the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.